I was driving through Montana headed east, and my company had miscalculated my mileage, so I requested an emergency fuel up. I got a response with the nearest gas station that I could get approved at. It wasn't exactly close, so I turned off the main highway and headed toward my stop. It's pitch black. There's no moon, no city light, and I haven't seen any headlights for about an hour. I'm cruising down the highway and I see something in the middle of the road at the furthest extent of my headlights, so I slow down, naturally, as I approach it. When I come to pass it, I get one good glance at it and slam on my brakes as I pass right in the middle of the highway. All I could think was, what did I just see? So I back up looking in my mirror until I see its red silhouette in my brake lights. I pull my brakes, put on my jacket and grab my flashlight and hop out. I walk to the back of my trailer and put my light on it, and there it was. A headless, skinless, mangled corpse. I froze and my jaw dropped. I didn't know what I was looking at. I just stood there, in the middle of the highway, in the cold, stagnant air. The only sound is the hum of my truck 50 feet back, watching the steam rise from this pile of meat. There was no fur, there was no clothing, just a fully intact ribcage with a mess of other miscellaneous bones attached by ligaments. I debated calling the police, as the ribcage looked big enough for someone my size, but I looked at my phone and had zero cell service. The nearest town was about 50 miles out. When I put my phone away, I flashed my light around, and standing at the end of the road were a handful of coyotes staring at me. Then they started coming through the fence and trotting my direction. I figured this is the part where I get back in the truck before I get into a situation. So I did, and continued on my way. I still to this day do not know if it was human or not. Whatever it was, and whatever had happened, I was almost a witness of. But in retrospect, I've never seen roadkill missing its flesh before. Many years ago, I was on a shift called Meet and Turn. This is where the truck driver that is domiciled out of the city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while the other driver that meets him halfway and brings the load where it needs to be delivered. I had been doing runs like these for several months, and I found out that I had to meet on point an hour before the other driver arrived. It was a dark and empty lot around 3:00 a.m., so since there was still some time to kill, I decided to close my eyes and take a short nap. About 10 minutes into my nap, I was awakened by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but the bark carried on for several minutes and it grew louder and closer. At this point, it became clear that he's either trying to alert me of something or he's just being a pain in the butt. So I sat up and looked out my window, and what I saw left me motionless. Standing there, inches on the other side of the glass, was a man around 35 years of age. He was a large fellow, and he was barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was even frothing a little from his mouth. The sheer creepiness struck me, and gently, without making any sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly started pulling away. As I was doing so, he was chasing after me, much like you would expect an angry dog, and still barking as I kept pulling away. Needless to say, I don't take naps on the job anymore. An older buddy was in the car with me, which was my '73 Mustang Mach 1. The engine had been rebuilt to street race. The friend sitting shotgun was a big Mopar fan, and his cars were fast. At the time, he had a GTX with a 446 pack. I couldn't touch his cars. He was goading me into showing me what the little pony car had under the hood. I was hesitant, but peer pressure got the best of me. We were driving through an industrial park where we drag raced late at night on the weekends, when I foolishly took the bait. It was around 8 p.m. during the middle of the week. We were doing over 120 when a car pulled out in front of us, turned wide and took up both lanes. I seriously don't think he even saw us coming. Mustangs are not the best handling cars by any means. I hit the brakes hard and we ended up going every which way but straight. I lost control of the car, jumped a curb, and ended up in a factory parking lot with two bent rims. I was lucky that was the only casualty. My 800% friend laughed his A&mo off. It was the last time I can remember giving in to peer pressure. Second incident was much more benign but immensely scarier. Just after graduating high school, I lost an eye due to a fireworks accident. A bottle rocket had my name on it. A year or so after recovering, I was driving home from work from a local steel yard. Same car. Maybe it was jinxed. I had the windows down and was jamming to the radio, doing around 40 mph when a bug or something hit me in the good eye and I couldn't see a thing. Luckily, I didn't freak out and slowly came to a stop. When I could see again, I was just inches from hitting the guardrail. I started wearing glasses after that. This story is from my grandpa. He's a retired long-distance truck driver and he often drove throughout the night and early hours of the morning over unfamiliar roads. This one particular day, when my grandpa was in his 30s, it was between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., and he was driving down a twisting country road that was so narrow only one vehicle could fit at a time. If two vehicles met from different directions, one would have to pull off the road to let the other pass. The road was empty save for my grandpa. On the right side of the road there was thick woodland, and on the left, open fields and a lake. There were no street lights. The only light came from my grandpa's truck and the moon. It was pretty lonely. My granddad was going steadily down the road and going a bit faster than he should have. When my grandpa said this, I always took it to mean he was blazing down the road as fast as the truck could go. He was listening to the radio and probably not paying much attention when he suddenly felt hands on his shoulders and a voice whisper his name in his ear, so close that he felt the breath on his skin. He recognized the voice. It belonged to his mother, who had passed away a few years previously. Naturally, this spooked my grandpa, and he instinctively hit the brakes. Seconds later, his headlights lit up a pile of 3 crashed cars that took up the entire road. My grandpa stopped just short of the wreckage. If he hadn't braked when he did, he would have plowed straight into the cars. The occupants in the crashed cars were all severely injured, and my grandpa was able to get emergency help. Had he joined the pileup, it probably would have meant a more dire outcome for all of them. There's a number of explanations for what my grandpa heard and felt, but my grandpa truly believes it was his mother giving him a warning. When I was younger, my family and I went on a road trip to Wyoming to see Yellowstone National Park. It's a beautiful place, and if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend it. Anyways, so from our home in California, it was about a 17-hour drive in our Yukon XL. It took us several days' worth of on and off driving to get there, and during the nights, we would try to find a little motel to rest at. One of the nights, due to us being behind schedule, my dad attempted to drive through the night to get us there sooner. He made it probably into the wee hours of the night before he deemed it unsafe and parked us in this little unlit rest stop in the middle of the woods in some flyover state. My brothers and I had fallen asleep in the car several hours before he'd stopped, so for at least a couple hours we were all sleeping in the car in this dark little parking lot surrounded by forest. Having got a couple hours of sleep and being in a pretty uncomfortable position, I woke up in the middle of the night, pretty disoriented but not really scared. I looked around and saw everyone fast asleep in this pitch-black car, and naturally, I felt pretty alone. I tried to fall back asleep, but it just wasn't working out, so I just sat there for a while, boredom setting in. Looking out the window to see where we were, it was pitch black, so I couldn't see jack shot. Luckily, I wasn't the type to pack light and had brought a couple flashlights in my bag. Being careful not to disturb my sleeping family, I reached into the back seat, unzipped my bag, and pulled out a little plastic, yellow flashlight. It wasn't the brightest, but it was enough to see the foreground of the general surroundings. I put it up to the glass, making sure not to make any noise, and pushed the little switch into the on position. I pressed my face against the glass and looked out. At first, it looked like a normal tree line with some bushes, trees, whatever. But as I scanned the darkness, looking for animals, buildings, etc., I noticed this dark shape standing between these two trees in the distance. It looked like the shape of a man, but it wasn't moving, just sitting there. After watching it for a good while and seeing no real signs of movement, I just assumed it was a bush or some kind of natural occurrence. Just as I was about to turn the light off and reattempt sleep, I saw this shadow shape turn 90 degrees and move behind a tree, disappearing from sight. This scared the shot out of me, and I immediately turned off the flashlight and threw my sweater-turned blanket over my head, shut my eyes tightly, and covered my ears. I was paralyzed with fear and, too full of adrenaline to get any sleep, sat in this semi-fetal position, clutching my flashlight for the rest of the night. I waited until the sun came up and we were back on the road before I got any sleep. I didn't tell anybody about the man I saw in the woods,